So it deals with every single situation that you can imagine. It deals with how to select the land that these buildings get constructed on, where to place cities. So it takes on a scale from the very small details to the larger cosmopolitan scale. So one of the basic tenets of Vastu Shastra is the square. Most examples of it are 9 by 9 square, so 81 grid. There's also some instances where an 8 by 8 grid is there. And while doing research on this topic, I found a very interesting story, the Vedic understanding of how this concept of Vastu came into being. So early on in the period of creation, there was a demon, or asura. So I'll just say demon, that's easier. And he was very antagonistic toward the demigods, which are the higher beings, like the universal administrators or supporters, the parallel of a government administration. And so in the process, these demigods were able to subdue this demon, and they threw him down to the earth. And then 81 of them had to pin him down to keep him restrained, or else he was going to be antagonistic again. And so that's the story behind these 81 squares. So each square is presided over one of these demigods, or these higher entities. And as a benediction, Lord Brahma, who was one of the chief demigods, offered him the sort of consolation that, okay, you will be face down on the earth, but you will be what's called the Vastu Purusha, or the form of the Vastu, or place, or dwelling, or place of residence. And so, as a result of that, the selection of the lands, the layout of the house, the layout of the place of work, or worship, or however, is very carefully dictated according to certain rules, according to the presiding entities or influences on that site. So the scientific approach also takes on the scale of the Vedic perception of time, that it is cyclical, daily, yearly. There's a concept of yuga which goes, which we can talk more about after, but is really another presentation in of itself. So one thing we can see is that on the right side, the eastern side of a structure, are typically activities that are relegated to the morning. So things like worship in the Vedic lifestyle, this Vedic culture, it starts off where you first bathe and then you do your daily worship, sort of get the day off on the right foot. And then as you progress to the middle, it's more the working space and the dining space, which is the result of the kitchen. And then in the evening are the evening activities. So for activities that are not, let's say, on the same level of work or worship, like the bathroom, the place where you sleep. So things like that. Another thing related to Vastu is that it is very, very much dependent on facing the cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, and that the direction of the place of dwelling has a strong influence on the kinds of activities or fortune or health that an occupant of this building can expect. And this is just based on understanding the laws of this material existence or the world around us. So in a way, it's a guidebook to better understand how to live better off in this world. Typically, entrances are on the east as well as the west in some cases. And again, it's about having this natural flow. In the very center is considered the breathing place of this Vastu Purusha, the presiding entity over this place, whether it's your home or city, etc. And so that is typically left open. In many traditional housing examples, you can see there's an open courtyard that's open to the sky. It's either a garden or outdoor furniture, or it's a body of water. So things like that. So it was very much systematically designed to allow for a more natural and happy experience in one's home. And this is an example of one example of a floor plan. So you can see the center hollow, as well as the column structure. Now, one thing that's interesting that I didn't mention is that these joints of the Vastu Purusha, see how he's kind of squeezed into this box? Well, the box is associated with the divine or the controlled environment, versus more circular or organic forms are associated with the more chaotic existence of the world around us. So this is a manifestation of that higher degree of control, of going beyond the chaos of the world around us. And this is an example of Vastu Shastra taken onto a larger scale. In the previous example, we saw it on the scale of a house. This is on the scale of a large temple complex that was constructed in the 9th century in the island of Java in Indonesia. And you can see that, unfortunately, only the 3 large structures exist today. The other remaining, I think it was reported 241 smaller shrines surrounding it have eroded over time. But this was a temple complex in honor of, again, going back to cycles, the 3 presiding deities over the cycles of creation, maintenance, and destruction. So in the Vedic understanding, creation is led by Lord Brahma, maintenance by Lord Vishnu, and destruction by Lord Shiva. So again, it's going back to the theme of cyclical, as well as you can see the strong adherence to the orthogonal, north, south, east, west, as well as to that open center, which is characteristic of most Vastu architecture. Taking that to an even larger scale, I want to talk a little bit about the example of Jaipur, India, or at least the old part of Jaipur, India. It's since grown immensely beyond that border. But again, I'm going back to this image of the Vastu Purusha, superimposed with an image of Jaipur. You can make out the walls here, which very closely align with that 9 by 9 square grid that we just saw. In the center of this grid is actually a very large open ground dedicated to a palace as well as the presiding leading temple in the city of Jaipur. And even on a city scale, Vastu Shastra applies in terms of where people live, where the temples tend to get located, where the leading citizens tend to live, where the businesses and workshops tend to take place. So in another source I was seeing, the workshops tend to be more in the south, the more spiritual activities are in the north, and as well as the residential. Another example I want to talk about was the Jagannath Puri temple, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not be, but it's a really, really fascinating example. So this is a typical scene of one of the main roads in Puri, which is in India. You can see it's very crowded, very chaotic. I'm sure you can almost hear all the noise that all those people are likely creating. So one of the challenges that this form of architecture handles really, really nicely is how to create a spiritual sanctuary in the midst of all that chaos, because that's really what spiritual life is. As hard as we try, we're not going to have things stop to us. It's not like nothing bad will ever happen to us. But as soon as we start to have a spiritual conception, we become unaffected by the chaos around us in this world that we see around us. So this was also an example of Vastu architecture. This tower and this tower behind are part of the original temple complex, at least that we see today, which was built in the 1100s. However, this temple complex is much, 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 much older, but this is just the latest iteration that we see before us today. As typical of Vastu architecture, it has a square base. This is the east side and west side, so the entrances, or the leading axis of building activity is along the east-west axis. In the 14th or 15th century, however, a wall was added, though it maintains the principle of adhering to these 4 cardinal directions. And the wall was added because there were at the time external threats to the temple specifically. And so amidst that chaos that I was describing, you first enter one of the outer gates. There's actually 2 sets of walls in this temple. And immediately, all of the noise on the outside is blocked off by these massive walls. And then suddenly you start to enter these buildings. There are 4 buildings today. You get deeper and deeper until you get finally into the sanctuary, which is has the aroma of flowers and incense and lamps that are being offered to the deities. It's dim candlelight, a complete contrast to the chaos of the world outside. So it really gives people who engage in this experience a really nice opportunity to experience what architecture can afford. I mean, this is a very clear example of how architecture can facilitate an entirely different set of mind. Another example is the Sri Rangam temple. Sorry for the heaviness on temples, it's just they're much better documented than everyday architecture. So this was an old sketch done of the Sri Rangam temple, which is in South India, and again is a really nice example of Vastu Shastras in practice. So you can see again the strong adherence to the orthogonal. You can see that the weight of the site or the building masses is much diminished in the center. And one other thing which is really, really amazing is it consists today of 21 huge towers. The tallest one I think is 236 feet, which is about a 23-story building, which, as you can tell, is pretty visible. And again, Vastu principles applied to the construction of this temple. You can see how the heights of each floor are successively diminished. So one principle that I learned about is Vastu even addresses the situation of single-story versus multi-story buildings. How about that? Where the first story is, let's say, a value of 1, and then the next floor is a value of 5/6 of the previous floor. The next one 6/7, 7/8, 8/9, etc. So even that level of detail is governed by this process of Vastu. And this was a temple that locals believe was created in the 3rd or 4th century BC, but modern-day archaeologists put it more in the 9th century, though there have been successive add-ons throughout time as recently as 1987. And on each of those 21 towers, you can see here that there are intricate sculptures and reliefs on these buildings, as well as elaborate columns depicting stories from the Vedic tradition. So one of the ones that I was able to get a picture of close up, so that's your good fortune, is the story of the Bhagavad Gita. So I think maybe Jai Jagannath had talked a little bit about it, but I just wanted to mention what's happening here. So on the horse, driving this chariot, is Krishna, or in the Vedic tradition is the name of God. In the chariot, as the passenger, is Krishna's friend and student, his disciple, Arjuna. Now, to give you a little context of what's going on in this one particular instance, Krishna is driving Arjuna's chariot in his form of support for one of the biggest battles ever fought on the face of this earth. On both sides, millions of people lined up, wave after wave, arrows just raining from the sky, obscuring the sun. Before this great battle was set to start, Arjuna had asked Krishna to take him to the center of the battlefield so he could see who his enemies were and really size them up. It was his way of displaying initially his valor and confidence in the battle coming up. But upon seeing the other side, the opposing army, because they consisted of his grandfather, his teachers, cousins, friends he had known since he was this young, he lost heart. And that's the premise of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna explains to Arjuna 5 basic topics, which are the nature of time, the law of karma, which is action and reaction in a very simplistic sense, material nature, which is the world that we see around us, everything that's dead or dull. Then there's the living entities, which is us and everything that's alive, and the nature of God. So he reveals himself to his student. So one nice thing that's illustrated by this is how architecture, not only in the case we saw with Jagannath Puri, creates an environment to facilitate that meeting with God. This is facilitating a memory of the pastimes or the stories that are brought forth by the Vedic culture. And I'll just talk a little bit about modern Vastu because honestly, the science is only now just facing a resurgence. So there aren't too many modern examples yet, but it's picking up. So one project is the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. And while it doesn't strictly follow all Vastu principles per se, there are still some things at work, like it's still strictly along an orthogonal, north, south, east, west orientation. It has an open center, albeit with a dome, but it's a 6-story clear opening that serves as the focal point, much like, let's say, the design of St. Paul's Cathedral in England or the Vatican with their cruciform design. and just a pretty picture because we all love pretty pictures. And then this is the construction as it is today. So it's well underway, and we can see a living, breathing example of at least some of the elements of Vastu Shastra in practice. And these are some of the more, let's say, everyday examples of Vastu elements in practice. So you can see here this inner sanctum courtyard along with the exposed walkway surrounding the courtyard, like that 81 square, the center of it. Also, Vastu office, one of the characteristics of it is again the very simple, clean design, the rigid adherence to the orthogonal. But I want to take a step away from, let's say, all the nuances of Vastu, and just go back to how the principle at work with this Vastu. And that's summarized by the word dharma. Dharma meaning the intrinsic quality of something. So for example, the dharma of fire is that it's hot and gives light. The dharma of sugar is that it's sweet. Similarly, the dharma of us as humans is that we are an eternal being that is a soul and has a relationship with God that is beyond this material world, this world of everyday life per se. And this architecture is one aspect of Vedas which eventually should take us to the point of inquiring into the absolute, or Sanskrit, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. So when we live our life according to, let's say, the natural quality of ourselves, living in harmony with nature, I mean, it can be nauseating. When I was doing research on Vastu, there are even rules where when you place a town here, the southwest corner has to be higher than the northeast corner, or else no town. Or I'm looking to buy a house and I like that piece of land. Well, before you can buy that piece of land, you have to bring in this expert, and this expert to make sure, A, that that's the right piece of land for you according to your karma, or the reactions that are coming your way, the stuff that happens in your life. You have to make sure that it's in accordance with the time and day that you were born, and you have to make sure that it's in accordance with, oh, this is the right time of year to purchase the land or construct the land. Like, that knowledge doesn't exist, and a lot of us just don't have the time to deal with that. So, the principle of it is, though, that we should be focusing on what's beyond these rules and regulations of the sort of material aspect of Vedic knowledge. We're all born, we all went to school. When we get our degree, the tendency is get married, get a job, get a house, have kids, and then, you die. But there is something beyond that. And so it's about minimizing these sort of distractions so that we can find peace and understand that there is more to this life than that series of steps that I just described. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and please forgive any shortcomings.
Okay, thank you so much. Now we're coming actually up to the end of the evening, which is sad and also very good because it brings us to the final aspect of the program, which really gets to the essence of this tradition of Vedic culture, or what you might call Bhakti Yoga. As he was describing, the external world around us has a very strong influence on our consciousness, our lifestyle, but even more so is understanding the space that's within. That we all have the opportunity to access a very deep and profound spiritual experience wherever we are, in any circumstance of life. And in the Vedic tradition, this is generally done through what we would call kirtan, or musical chanting. It's an opportunity to simultaneously engage our mind, our conscience, and our heart in a very absorbing and satisfying way. It's an intrinsic nature, intrinsic part of Vedic culture. We want to offer you the authentic experience here. We'll show you how it's going to work, but for those who are musicians, you guys are going to love it. And the idea is actually this is a type of meditation. So this is really like the guided meditation aspect. We're going to be doing chanting of certain mantra that is meant to actually increase our consciousness. It's meant to awaken higher consciousness. A lot of this discussion this night has been about living in accordance with a higher reality or higher state of consciousness. So the process of kirtan is actually considered the most powerful way to access that, amongst many of the different means that we've talked about tonight. So we're going to get set up with some instruments and some music here. And the idea is that it's a very participatory activity. We're going to need everyone's help. Are you guys ready to help? Are you guys willing to help out?
Yeah.
Yeah.